We're going to talk more about this now with political expert Anastasiya Shapochkina, who joins me live. Anastasiya, thanks for taking the time to speak to us. Where do we stand now as you see it? Are things swinging back in Ukraine's favor?
Definitely, the latest version of the plan is much better than the first Russia-US version, which is pretty much a recap of the Russian ultimatum of December 2021, before Russia entered Ukraine, and would absolutely limit Ukraine's capacity to defend itself. Ukraine has already been subject to such treatment by Russia throughout their long history of coexistence, and that always has ended in entire subjugation of the nation. So this was unacceptable. What happened over the weekend in Geneva is that European negotiators were involved in the negotiating together with Ukraine, with the US. And also, from what we understand, the US internal position is not entirely homogenous. So the people who were negotiating on behalf of the U.S. delegation, led by Marco Rubio, they have had the results were more reachable with them than with the people who were sent to negotiate, so to say, with the Russians, like Vitkov, the special representative, who eventually came out with a writ of Russian position. So the improvement is not only in the number of troops, but also in especially in the place of the security guarantees for Ukraine, in the potential place for the coalition of the willing on Ukrainian territory, in not closing the door to eventual Ukrainian membership in NATO, etc., etc. So there are several conditions which are better. But what we're seeing and what we can face soon is catch-22, firstly. The same as we have seen during the Normandy negotiations in 2014-15, when Russia would not accept the ceasing of hostilities and a real ceasefire before the next steps were taken, which is exactly what this new version is purporting. And also, what is most important about this new version, this is the version developed by Ukrainians, Europeans, really influenced by them, and so that amends a lot the Russian version of events. But the key remains: Russia has to accept it, and is Russia ready to really negotiate? And does it really need the ceasefire or a settlement as badly as Ukraine right now?
Indeed. And the other question is does this give enough to Ukraine? Kyiv finding itself caught between on a tightrope, so to speak, caught between having to show gratitude for U.S. support, showing alarm over that initial draft deal that it said was heavily tilted toward Moscow. Now it seems a little bit better, but perhaps not 100% where Ukraine wants it. And what's Zelensky's best move at this point?
Zelensky's important objective, I think, in this process is to keep the US on board, not to be abandoned by the US. This is also the stake for the Europeans, to make sure that the US stays in the negotiation, that it doesn't walk out of the room, and that it doesn't just pull the plug. Because, of course, the negotiation can continue as long as the US negotiates, and as long as it keeps selling weapons now, no longer delivering weapons, but really selling weapons to Ukraine, without which Ukraine's defenses are going to be much weakened. So I think that's number one objective for President Zelensky. That's why he reiterated actually his gratitude right after the Geneva negotiations were over, saying that he's very grateful to Donald Trump for all of the efforts they're making.
Indeed. And what about Europe in all of this? Initially, European allies were unhappy because they were shut out of that drafting of that initial document. They're having their own meeting this morning on Ukraine. How do you see Europe responding?
From what I understand, the European diplomats and negotiators were involved in the Geneva process, and they have helped Ukraine strengthen its position and influence the negotiations.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Anastasiya Shapochkina, for taking the time to speak
Thank
to us
you.
here on France 24.